The Victoria Cross remains the UK's highest award for gallantry in combat. In the First World War, 628 Victoria Crosses were awarded. Just 4 of these went to men of the Tank Corps. All were posthumous.
Captain Clement Robertson
died whilst carefully guiding the 4 tanks of his section to their objective in full view of the enemy and on foot.
Born 15th of December 1890.
Killed in action 4th of October 1917 at Zonnebeek near Ypres, Belgium.
Aged 26.
For most conspicuous bravery in leading his tanks in attack under heavy shell, machine gun and rifle fire over ground which had already been heavily ploughed by shell fire. Captain Robertson, knowing the risk of the tanks missing the way, continued to lead them on foot, guiding them carefully and patiently towards their objective, although he must have known that his action would almost inevitably cost him his life. This gallant officer was killed after his objective had been reached, but his skillful leading had already ensured successful action. His utter disregard of danger and devotion to duty afford an example of outstanding valour.
I think it was incredibly brave. A lot of acts of valour are spontaneous, but if you read about it, this was an act of valour that went on for 4 days, from the 30th of September to the 4th of October. So it was thought out. Sometimes, the human being will do something as a reaction to something, but this was sort of thought out. So I think, me personally, I just think that it was amazing under fire for 4 days and nights with no sleep to then lead your tanks into what was a barrage of fire. I think he must have known, and they say this, that he knew that it was going to cost him his life.
Captain Richard William Leslie Wayne,
killed having taken an enemy strong point on foot, having been seriously wounded when his tank was destroyed by a direct hit.
Born 5th of December 1896,
killed in action 20th of November 1917 at Marcoing near Cambrai, France.
Aged 20.
For most conspicuous bravery in command of a section of tanks. During an attack, his tank was disabled by a direct hit near an enemy strongpoint, which was holding up the attack. Captain Wayne and one man, both seriously wounded, were the only survivors. Though bleeding profusely from his wounds, he refused the attention of stretcher bearers, rushed from behind the tank with a Lewis gun and captured the strongpoint, taking about half the garrison prisoners. Although his wounds were very serious, he picked up a rifle and continued to fire at the retiring enemy until he received a fatal wound in the head. It was due to the valour displayed by Captain Wayne that the infantry were able to advance.
Well, we're tremendously proud of him, and he did a wonderful thing. What he did was beyond the call of duty, really. He was only 20 years old and had his life ahead of him. The highest honour achieved for one person in the family to have got that is tremendous. They did so much for their future generations. It's a must that we remember them and know what they did. The bravery and heroism and sacrifice they made is beyond belief, really.
Lieutenant Cecil Harold Sewell,
hit by machine gun fire having rushed across open ground to rescue the crew of another tank and returning to bandage the wounds of his driver despite being wounded himself.
Born 27th of January 1895.
Killed in action 29th of August 1918 at Frémicourt near Bapaume, France.
Aged 23.
When in command of a section of Whippet light tanks in action, this officer displayed most conspicuous bravery and initiative in getting out of his own tank and crossing open ground under heavy shell and machine gun fire to rescue the crew of another Whippet of his section, which had side-slipped into a large shell hole, overturned and taken fire. The door of the tank having become jammed against the side of the shell hole, Lieutenant Sewell, by his own unaided efforts, dug away the entrance to the door and released the crew. In doing so, he undoubtedly saved the lives of the officer and men inside the tank, as they could not have got out without his assistance. After having extricated the crew, seeing one of his own crew lying wounded behind his tank, he again dashed across the open ground to his assistance. He was hit in doing so, but succeeded in reaching the tank when a few minutes later he was again hit, fatally, in the act of dressing his wounded driver. During the whole of this period, he was within full view and short range of the enemy machine guns and rifle pits, and throughout, by his prompt and heroic action, showed an utter disregard for his own personal safety.
I think it's important to kind of keep the story alive, make sure people know what happened and to show their bravery. Never really thought about it as being like something kind of special because he's just part of the family, but it's really proud to be part of it. I think it's amazing. I couldn't imagine ever doing anything like that, being so brave and selfless. I think it's like a symbol of his bravery and what he did to save others and show what he did.
Lieutenant Colonel Richard Annesley West
fell riddled with bullets whilst riding on horseback along the front line, encouraging a leaderless infantry unit to withhold a counterattack.
Born 26th of September 1878,
Killed in action 2nd of September 1918 at Courcelles near Bapaume, France.
aged 39.
For most conspicuous bravery, leadership and self-sacrifice. It was intended that a battalion of light tanks under the command of this officer should exploit the success of the initial infantry and heavy tank attack. He therefore went forward in order to keep touch with the progress of the battle and arrived at the front line when the enemy were in process of delivering a local counterattack. The infantry battalion had suffered heavy officer casualties and its flanks were exposed. Realising there was a danger of the battalion giving way, he at once rode out in front of them under extremely heavy machine gun and rifle fire and rallied the men. In spite of the fact that the enemy were close upon him, he took charge of the situation and detailed non-commissioned officers to replace officer casualties. He then rode up and down in front of them in face of certain death, encouraging the men and calling to them, "Stick it, men! Show them fight! For God's sake, put up a good fight!" He fell riddled by machine gun bullets. The magnificent bravery of this very gallant officer at the critical moment inspired the infantry to redoubled efforts, and the hostile attack was defeated.
I think he just loved it. The last letter he wrote said he was having the time of his life. In a way, it was probably the best thing that happened, being killed the way he was, rather than having to go back to civilian life. I think he just saw the situation and thought, well, I've got to get these troops together, and I've got to try and fight the enemy, or we're going to be wiped out. Incredibly brave. Yes, I mean, just unbelievable to commit such a suicidal act. Just very emotional. Can't really describe it. It's just that we can somehow succeed over evil. Doesn't matter who you are, you can show great acts of bravery.
The Victoria Cross was instituted by Queen Victoria in 1856, and she actually handed out the very first medals the following year. When you look at a Victoria Cross, it's actually a rather small, dull piece of bronze, about 50p's worth of metal, but it's what it symbolises, that's what's important. In the First World War, only 4 Victoria Crosses were awarded to Tank Corps soldiers. They all happened to be officers, and they were all awarded to actions outside of their tanks. That's where they could be seen, and that's why they were recommended for this award. Now, their stories are about courage, about selflessness, about leadership, and amazing humanity. And the great thing is, here at the Tank Museum, not only can the public come and learn about those stories, but they're also an inspiration to the next generation of soldiers, nowadays young men and young ladies who may have to fight for their country again in the future.
An open drawer, a woman lowly kneeling, some little crimson shoes, a lock of hair, some childish toys, an engine and a trumpet, a headless horse, a battered teddy bear, some schoolboy books, all inky, torn and thumb-marked, a treasured bat, his favourite cricket ball, the things he loved, the letters he wrote her, and now she places on top of all a soldier's sword, his photograph, in khaki. The boyish eyes smile back into her eyes, while in her hand she holds a VC tightly, and in her heart a graven Flanders lies.